Hi, good morning. I am Michael Chevy Castronova, business editor at the Gazette. Welcome to our second quarter business breakfast panel for 2021. Today's topic is about energy and supply chain and all the things that keep those things working and ideally keep our world in balance. We'll be discussing the rather grand sounding Iowa's power grid of the future, but that's something everyone here, all the panelists you see here in front of you have been thinking about for some time, and they're concerned about it. And, then we had this past August 10, which is everyone in Eastern Iowa and other parts of the Midwest know what happened that day. And that's why I'm still working in my basement, among other reasons. And like the floods of 2008, that upended certainly here how we get by and maybe what we can depend on. So this morning, we're going to chat with our panelists about what they see from their different viewpoints. And we have some great variety here this morning, which is wonderful. And what they expect when we have our next massive storm or flood or whatever happens next. I will tell all those of you viewing, we had 100 people sign up for this, which is our cap with Zoom. So that's great. I know a lot of you sent in questions early. We will get to some of those or many of those. But before we begin our discussion, we have with us this morning from our sponsor, Bergen KDV, Nicole Mead, who's going to speak to us for just a little bit. Nicole, what's up? Hi.
Hey, thank you, Michael. And thank you everyone for attending this morning. Very excited to be a sponsor for the Gazette Breakfast Series. And if you're not familiar, Bergen KDV is your area technology, business, and financial services partner. Locally here in the corridor, we do have offices downtown Cedar Rapids and in Coralville, and we are a Midwest-based firm, kind of throughout the way here. And something I wanted to highlight that I thought would be relevant to today's topic, since we are on the topic of energy, we are much more than a CPA services firm. And in the past year, especially with everything going on with the CARES Act and most recently a lot of ERC credit work, we've been helping area businesses that were shut down because of the derecho get those tax credits back. Our sales tax team right now, we are always keeping busy by finding ways to get more money back in the pocket of our clients. We do this through work like work opportunity tax credits, sales and tax compliant reviews, and then energy exemption studies. So if you're working with if you're a manufacturer or a business that uses a lot of energy, we can go in and do a study on this and save on sales tax. So would love to chat more. And once again, thank you for this opportunity. Looking forward to the great panel today. And I'll head it back over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Thank you for being with us this morning. I also want to mention our community partners, Dubuque and Corridor Careers, local jobs with a national reach. So now to our panel. For those of you watching this live, you can submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Those will go to Chelsea Greider, whom you can't see, but she's with us too. Those will go to her. She'll put them on my screen. Please do that during our discussion as your thoughts and questions come up. If you wait till the final 10 minutes, you know how that goes, and that will greatly reduce the chances we can even get to those. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you for being here this morning. I'd like to go around the screen, my screen as I see it. And if you can tell us your title, where you work, and just a brief, executive summary of what you do here so that people watching will know why you're here. So from the top of my screen, May, who are you?
Good morning, everyone. My name is May Farlinger. I'm the Director of Operations for Alliant Energy. I have responsibility for generation and distribution from Cedar Rapids over to Clinton and down to the Fort Madison, Keokuk area. In addition to my operations responsibility, I'm also focused on economic development, account management for the state of Iowa, and our regulatory activity. Excited to be here with everybody today. Thanks.
Thanks, May. Michaela, you're next on my screen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michaela Freiburger. I am the program coordinator the Dubuque County Energy District. I essentially run all of our programming, including right now, we're taking our efforts to the streets, have conversations to help build a more resilient community around energy. I additionally am really interested in sharing our efforts today and bringing forward what the Energy District movement is.
Thank you. Dusky, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, good morning, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Gazette for hosting this discussion. My name is Dusky Kerri. I'm president of ITC Midwest. We're an independent transmission company based in Cedar Rapids, and we own and operate and maintain about 6,700 miles of transmission, mostly in Iowa. And we don't own any generation. We don't serve any retail customers directly, just strictly transmission. So thank you.
Thank you. And next in this, is it Brady Bunch or Partridge Family? I can never remember. And these squares. Chad, you're next, sir.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining. My name is Chad Wiltz. I'm Vice President of Energy for Van Meter. We're 100% employee-owned company that's been around for 95 plus years. My responsibilities really are focused on our solar division within the company of selling energy products. So every product that it takes to construct and get a solar array up and functioning and commissioned is really what I have responsibility for, the group and groups that do that day in and day out. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Kerri.
Good morning, I'm Kerri Johannsen. I'm the Energy Program Director with the Iowa Environmental Council, and we work in the regulatory, legislative sphere and at the local level to promote 100% renewable energy. It's really fun to see lots of familiar faces here today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Cool, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Before we go any farther, so I got a note yesterday, and I'm gonna ask May and Dusky to help me with this. ITC owns and operates electric transmission systems. Alliant Energy handles distribution systems. What's the difference? May, what's the difference?
Absolutely. So as Dusky mentioned, we serve retail customers. So the connection from the grid to a home or a business is generally coming from Alliant Energy. Dusky and ITC take care of the big power lines, the high voltage that's coming directly from sources and into the distribution grid. Hopefully that helps answer that question. Dusky, feel free to add on as you'd wish.
I think that's great, May. And I like to use the analogy of the road system. So we are the representative of the interstate system, kind of the high speed, high voltage electricity being delivered to the state and county highway system, which represents the distribution lines that Alliant Energy owns.
Okay. All right. And we are getting questions already, but I get to go first because, so this is my opening question. This is for everyone. So here's the big question. Demand for energy is rising. We know this. Beyond light and heat and air conditioning, we all have countless computers and phones. Increased internet use, stores and businesses are now reopening almost like a surge. Are we in Eastern Iowa, are we ready? What do you think is the one thing, sorry, you only get to pick one this time in our opening round. What is it we need to do to get ready? Kerri, I'm going to start with you. What do we need? One thing, one.
I think investing in energy efficiency is always the number one thing for regardless of whether you're facing energy increases or not, but energy efficiency should always be first.
Who would like to go next? I used to teach high school English. I can call on people if you want. Dusky.
I'll take this one, Michael. I think, are we ready today? Yes, we are ready today to serve the needs of Iowans. My concern is about the future, and are we ready tomorrow? And by tomorrow, I don't mean 24 hours from now. I mean 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I think the one thing that we need to do is invest in a modernized power grid. And that may sound a little self-serving coming from a transmission company, But let me explain why, because there are key drivers for why we need to make that investment. And number one is this massive shift to renewable energy that we've already seen in the state of Iowa, and we're in the midst of. It's not done. It's going to continue on for several years, and we need a transmission system that will support that expansion of renewable energy. We have major threats to the grid on an ongoing basis. We have an aging system. We have threats from severe weather events. The Iowa derecho is the latest example of that. And we have cyber threats that are hitting our system every single day that we have to continually protect against and invest in measures to make sure that we have a secure system. And then finally, the electrification of the economy is driving that need for investment. And we're seeing that primarily in the automobile industry. You know, we've got major auto manufacturers that have announced a total transition to electric vehicles over a period of time. If we're going to have a system that can support that EV charging infrastructure, we got to start investing now in upgrading our transmission system and invest in that transmission system.
I would add on to that in terms of the investments that we continue to make both in the electric and the gas infrastructure on the distribution level. One thing to keep in mind is historically, the energy grid was really created to be a one-way street or a one-way flow. We would produce power at power plants. It would move across pipes, wires, through substations, onto poles and transmission lines. We're now seeing a change in how that's working. It's really becoming a two-way flow of both energy and information. So as Dusky mentioned, the continued deployment of renewables on the grid requires power to flow in both directions. It requires information to flow in both directions. And as a utility, we'll have to continue to think about those new technologies and making sure that our grid is flexible and ready to take on that new information and that new way of flow.
I would add to that in saying that I think continued diversification in our generation and fuel sources is important. I don't think any single fuel source, whether it be renewables or fossil fuel, is the proverbial answer for everything. You've got different size loads, you've got different located loads, different use, but I think increased diversification across all energy segments in terms of industrial, residentially, and otherwise presents options. And options not only for transmission connection or distribution connection, but options for homeowners, commercial business owners, all the way up to the industrial customer. I think being pigeonholed into one traditional fuel source, whether that be coal or gas or nuclear, is probably not the answer long term. And I think both May and Dusky probably have their work cut out for them in terms of their planning in the future, because they're now faced with bringing all of these different generation sources that are quite frankly being generated at different locales all together fairly seamlessly. So I think the collaboration that this opportunity presents and ongoing is going to be critical in terms of as the grid and generation sources continue to diversify.
Michaela, we have you here because I understand exciting things are happening in Dubuque. So what do you think? What's the one thing?
So I think Eastern Iowans, really, we need to take a look at our communities that were disproportionately impacted by this pandemic and other weather catastrophes. And previously, they were left behind in our clean energy transition. So our clean energy policies, whether it be locally, at the state, or federally, need to work together, and we need to be intentional about our market transformation. And we need to focus on energy efficiency, as Kerri mentioned before, and building a grid that can withstand if we have another catastrophic weather or global event as well.
Okay, so following on from what you said, and Dusky, I think you're the one who used the word aging, the phrase aging system. How, and this is again, and we were also getting this as a question from one of our viewers, how sturdy, resilient, I'm told resilient is the term I should use. How resilient is our transmission supply routes? I know that you were asked a lot about these things especially post derecho, May and Dusky. Dusky, I know you were at a bunch of our news. We saw you at a bunch of news conferences taking these very questions. Should we sleep soundly at night the next time there's a big storm, snowstorm, Texas happens? Do you sleep soundly at night? How safe is this? Because one of the questions was, talking about burying transmission lines. There's been a lot of talk about that. How good and solid are we?
So you covered a lot of ground in that question.
It was open-ended.
I'll start with, yes, we're in good shape today. And I do sleep soundly at night, and Iowans should sleep soundly at night because they've got a lot of companies working together to make sure that there's a reliable supply of electricity to serve their needs. We in the electric utility business are really in the business of balancing cost and risk. We can build a virtually completely reliable delivery system to the customer to make sure that they never lose power, but at what cost? And you mentioned undergrounding. For transmission, to underground a transmission line, the cost of that increases by 6 to 12-fold over overhead. And so it's really cost prohibitive in most cases to underground transmission. Distribution is a different story, but in terms of high voltage transmission, it's just cost prohibitive. You mentioned the derecho, the most significant storm, the most widespread severe damage that we have ever seen at ITC. And we responded. We had 145 lines out August 10th that spanned about 2,100 miles in 26 different Iowa counties. And so again, widespread severe damage to our transmission system. We responded. We brought crews in from out of state, and we had power restored to all of the substations that we serve in 8 days, which is a pretty phenomenal turnaround time for a company of our size with the amount of transmission that we own. Now, that was unprecedented. I mentioned biggest storm in ITC history. That unprecedented storm is now precedented. And so we need to make sure that we're prepared for the next one. We've done lessons learned. We've identified areas we can do better, and we'll be better prepared for the next big event.
So following from that, and something I know we've all been wondering about, especially after what happened with Colonial Pipeline and meatpacking companies and various others being hacked. May, are you worried a lot about that, about hacking and security and what happens next in ransomware? Sure you are.
Sure I am. A little worried, yes, but I'll tell you that at Alliant, safety is our #1 priority. So it's something that we focus on every single day. That's the safety of our employees, it's the safety of our customers, and staying safe allows us to really serve our customers with the reliable service that they count on us for. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that our electric and gas supply is safe, and it is safe. We take it really seriously. Any threat that could affect our ability to serve our customers safely, efficiently, and responsibly is taken with the highest priority. Keeping that supply safe for our customers involves making sure that outside threats don't get into our systems and our networks. The Colonial Pipeline was forced to shut down because of a cyber attack that compromised their IT systems, right? We've got a dedicated team at Alliant Energy that concentrates on preventing those cyber attacks and impacting our systems and our networks. We're continuously monitoring our IT infrastructure very closely to protect the energy grid. We work closely with public and private partners to proactively mitigate any threats. And our employees play a really large role in making sure that they're the last line of defense. We continue to remind our workforce that they have to pay really close attention to emails, particularly anything that's coming externally that contains a link. Our employees are kept up to date with the latest information in that area, so we know it's constantly changing and we're educating our workforce on that. Bottom line, we never assume positive intent when it comes to links or attachments coming through external emails. Clicking a bad link or an attachment really is the access that outsiders are looking for to get into the company's network. We also participate in national exercises that simulate cyber and physical attacks on the electric and other critical infrastructure. So these exercises not only strengthen our partnerships with state, local, and federal government, but also make sure that we're connected with critical industry partners. So yes, am I nervous about it? Yes, but at the same time, I know we've got some great practices in place that will help safeguard the utility and the grid and our customers.
Yeah, I didn't mean that as a trick question. I was there's a way to get into it. So, Kerri, sort of similar to that, the Iowa Environmental Council in April, I think, hosted an online panel on energy resilience and justice, I believe that was the terminology. Panelists talked about a number of things, and I realize I'm really condensing this a lot into one aspect, but you talked about how environmental disasters hurt lower income people, so such as the derecho or such as what happened in Texas. Could you talk briefly about all of that, about how that and energy issues affect some residents more than others, particularly in Eastern Iowa, and vis-a-vis that panel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely encourage folks to go check out that is available on our 100% Iowa video page. So you can go and listen yourself. We had some great Eastern Iowa panelists on there. So definitely recommend that. But yeah, certainly, I mean, this is a topic we could go into a lot and doesn't get enough attention, I think. Basically, we start off with just the idea of energy burden, the amount people pay for electricity generally. So there's a certain amount that, that folks pay. And we already know that the energy burden for Black households is 43% higher than white households, that Hispanic households pay a 20% higher energy burden, and that Native American people have a 45% higher energy burden on average, just to begin with. And this is really based on historic policies that have led to economic and social exclusion of these communities, redlining, lack of access to mortgages and loans, employment discrimination, legacy of segregation. And so you end up with, to begin with folks in substandard housing. And then when you have a disaster strike, you end up with disproportionate impacts for people of color and low-income people who are living in housing that just isn't as resilient. So just to give an example, the Department of Energy has a great tool that allows you to look at energy burden down to the county level. And I took a look at Lynn County. Lynn County overall, their energy burden is just 2% on average. But if you dial down and you look at people who are 80% of median state income or less, that energy burden in Lynn County jumps up to 6%, which is considered a disproportionate, a high energy burden. If you go outside of Lynn County to some of the rural areas, rural counties around, it gets even worse. So if you look at Cedar, Benton, and Delaware counties, for people 80% or below, they actually have an 11% energy burden, which is considered extremely high. So that's just, to begin with, what we're seeing in Eastern Iowa. There was a touch really briefly on a great review that was done of the Marshalltown tornado that happened in 2018, and disproportionate impacts that fell on the Hispanic community in Marshalltown. Some really striking numbers about just the amount of damage that was experienced by Latinx households. So approximately 33%, only 33% of Latina households in Marshalltown had no damage at all, while about half of white households experienced no damage. You also end up with more folks who are uninsured then. So if you don't have a disaster declaration, those folks suffer more. There's also evidence from the Marshalltown example that minority households on average had to wait longer for their utilities to be reconnected than non-Hispanic white households. And so that's another thing that, some states are looking at closely, like how is that reconnection process going? How is the disconnection process going? Just to get more data and understand that better. And that's something we would like to see in Iowa as well.
Okay, thank you. Other panelists, feel free to jump in, comment, add on at any time. And we're going to get to solar because I know there were a lot of solar questions. I'm holding that for a moment here. Michaela, so in Dubuque, the Dubuque County Energy District website says your mission is for 100% sustainable, efficient, and or renewable energy by 2050, which is not that far away. Could you talk to us about that, please, maybe in two parts? First, about how your county aims to be 100% sustainable, what you're doing precisely toward that goal, and then how you believe that will aid, and to read the rest of it, a vibrant economy. How's that? How does one lead to the other? At least give us, if you give us an executive summary of what are you doing? How are you going to do that? Because that's a lot.
It is a lot, and we're very fortunate that Dubuque County Energy District is one of 10 energy districts here in Iowa. There are other states that are starting to follow on and have some energy district models implemented in their counties. So as you mentioned, 100% sustainable, efficient, and renewable. So we have a couple different components: building a vibrant economy, resilient communities, and then also we are focused on our climate and building a stable climate. I have a 7-year-old at home, so building it for her for in the future is very important. And so what we do is we look to implement all of these, bits and pieces of our vision through education. So we are taking our energy efficiency conversations to the streets, meeting people where they are, moving into energy planning. So meeting with our rural farmers and our other rural businesses to talk about how they can be more energy efficient, or building a plan for them through an energy audit. Additionally, market transformation and working on investment into clean and renewable energy, working with our partners like Kerri at the Iowa Environmental Council to be an advocate, not only locally and at the state level, but also at the national level. Then one thing that really helps set the energy district model apart, which I'll go into a little bit later, is our partnerships and how we can interconnect all of the resources in our communities to build a stronger tomorrow. And in the end, we want to be able to catalyze this movement and to kind of similarly to the way Soil and Water District Commissions were formed, have this be a grassroots movement to beyond. So we have some intentional efforts, and we have 5 different focuses that we really like to emphasize. One is collaborating with partners to build energy efficient homes and residences, as well as businesses, and work towards advocating for increasing weatherization services to affect those who Kerri was discussing are currently disproportionately impacted with our energy grid. Additionally, we look to educate about the economic, the social, and the environmental impacts of our current energy grid and what that would look like into the future as we transition. Things like being a clearinghouse, so interconnecting projects for our local Habitat for Humanity with local solar installers to reach our at-risk and low-income residents, to have them be more sustainable on their own, all the way down to connecting small businesses and not-for-profits to solar panels that may be just cosmetically damaged so they can lower their costs as well. So all in all, our goal is to reach 100%, which means everyone, not just those who can, to build a more resilient grid for tomorrow. So we do look to make this impact here in our county, here within our energy district movement with the other 10 energy districts in Iowa, and really collaborate with our community stakeholders. Because once we build this movement and inspire our neighbors and empower them to be part of this, these resources will continue to come from our local levels as well as higher organizations to support a more efficient energy grid that can withstand whatever life may throw at any of us. Additionally, our network really works to share our approaches, our resources, and our experiences. So here in Dubuque County, we haven't been doing our energy district movement as long as Winneshiek Energy District. They had 10 years of experience. So learning from the more rural communities of how we can reach all of our communities, not just those within our urban center, has really been very beneficial to working towards 100% by 2050. It's not just us floating around figuring out what it looks like on our end. And then also, from development of our technical energy analysis and our planning tools to the training of our energy conservationists, managing, IT network databases, and working with state and federal agencies to support this boots on the ground effort. That's really critical for us to build a more resilient energy grid and also to get the buy-in of the average person in our communities. So in the end, these boots on the ground efforts, continue to financially incentivize as well as encourage others to, on the other end of things, save money as well to enable this retrofitting and re-energize America.
Okay. So a couple of things out of that, and we are getting questions about both of these, about storage and about solar. So let's do storage first. So one of the questions was, we're hearing more about energy storage. What is the current state of storage for Iowa generated energy, and what do we need to be doing next? And there was a question on the list here too about batteries. There we go. A more robust electric system seems to need two-way customer generators, which is kind of goes to what you were talking about, May. And are we moving from more centralized generation? It's early, I haven't had enough caffeine. Generation and toward reuse of infrastructure by promoting distribution resources. That's a mouthful. Who wants to take that really complex subject about storage?
Well, I can give you an overview, just
Yes.
a factoid of how much storage we currently have in Iowa. Utility scale storage, we have 6.9 megawatts of utility scale battery storage. There's something called the MISO interconnection queue, which is where generators line up to get interconnected to the large regional grid. And there we had 415 megawatts of storage proposed in Iowa, currently pending at different levels. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's just in the line. So you can see that's a fairly large power plant size amount of storage for the state. And then I will pass it on to others.
No, I do. When you say 6.9, what does that mean? Is that a lot? Is that out of 10? What does that mean?
6.9 megawatts is not a whole lot of storage currently in Iowa. It's about maybe three big wind turbines worth of storage.
Okay, so I see a lot of people
from an
smiling.
Alliant perspective, I'll add on there, we do have 3 locations that we've installed battery storage in Marshalltown, Wellman, and Decorah. Each of those are teaching us 3 different things. In Marshalltown, that battery is connected to utility scale solar. In Wellman, it's providing resiliency and reliability in a rural area where we've seen an abundance of customer-owned generation. And in Decorah, it's being used as an electron bank to manage capacity on a circuit instead of having to rebuild it. So we're going to continue to look for ways that we can utilize battery storage to enhance reliability and how we can best use that technology in other areas as well. We expect to add about 100 megawatts of distributed energy resources by 2026, and that's community solar, it's energy storage systems. We all know that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, but I will tell you, the wind's been blowing quite a bit in Iowa the last couple of months. But we need that storage to help smooth out the fluctuations and potentially avoid costs for rebuilds on the energy grid. So battery storage will definitely be a part of our future. We will continue to look for opportunities, and we'll utilize the projects that we have on the system today to learn and deploy further battery storage into the future.
I would just add, from my perspective, seeing things downstream a little bit from utility scale, mainly commercial and residential consumers, those suppliers, particularly the inverter manufacturers within the solar space, are investing millions and millions of dollars into battery storage and battery options. I think you're going to see that more widely deployed at the residential level, just simply because of scale. I think anytime you get to a utility scale battery and storage where it's at right now, it's still somewhat cost prohibitive in terms of wide scale adoption there. But I think you're starting to see battery and storage be leveraged on residential and commercial scale, particularly solar builds. Part of the reason for that, a lot of people, on the heels of the derecho and other catastrophic weather and climate events, really see, I think, incorrectly, storage and battery replacing backup generation. In principle, it can, but the integrity of our grid locally through both ITC and Alliant really acts as the constant, if you will. So from a return on investment, most people will have a solar system on their commercial business and or home and use a traditional generator in the event that they would need that. I think as battery cost continues to come down and we coalesce around one or two battery technologies, then you'll start to see economies of scale. So I think this is probably a down-up approach as opposed to a top-down in terms of residential and commercial development and adoption will come first. And then ultimately at the utility scales, battery technology coalesces and economies of scale become greater, then I think you'll see a wider adoption at the utility scale level.
Dusky, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think May and Chad really covered it well in the work that Alliant Energy is doing. Is informing applications for storage here in Iowa. The thing I would add to what Chad said in terms of the cost, I think energy storage holds great potential for our industry, but cost is still an issue. Where you're seeing, I think, the greatest opportunity today is where public policy is providing the incentive. And so if you pair battery storage with renewable energy, you can qualify for the investment tax credit at the federal level that helps buy down the cost of that initial investment.
The other place where I see batteries and storage leverage at a residential commercial level is when, quite frankly, we're in a service territory of a utility that doesn't have as robust of a net metering policy that some of our investor-owned utilities have. So it's the way, or they have a exorbitant time of day use charge. That's a way by leveraging storage where you can store the energy and then use it at an optimal time if in fact the utility is not incenting you to do so. So that's where we see it leveraged most often is really where utility net metering policies are somewhat prohibitive to solar and the use of solar energy.
Okay, and while we're talking about solar, so one of the questions, May, Alliant has two, according to the question, utility scale solar array system in Dubuque. How are they laid out and how are they working? And I'm interpreting how are they working and are you getting a profit from that or are they serving their customers? What do you see?
Yeah, we actually have a couple of different solar installations. We actually installed at Indian Creek Nature Center here in Cedar Rapids several years ago, and there's a couple different types of solar panels being utilized at that site in particular. And the information coming from those solar panels is available for people to look at. If you want to see what a tracking solar panel does versus a fixed solar panel, there's a lot of great information in regards to that system that's been installed at Indian Creek. We have a very similar kind of solar lab that's been installed at our headquarters in Madison, Wisconsin. So outside of Iowa, but very close to us geographically, that is producing some fantastic information for consumers to utilize as well. And then in addition to that, as referenced in the question, we do have some solar that is at the utility scale, the Marshalltown solar plant, and then in Dubuque as well. Those assets are producing solar, they're powering homes, and they're performing as we would expect them to. We were fortunate as the derecho went through the state of Iowa that those systems did not sustain major damage, if any damage. So they continue to produce power. They're producing clean, renewable power for our IPL customers, and we're really pleased with those assets. As we think about what we'll do next from a solar perspective, we've got 1,300 megawatts of wind on the system. Our plans next are to add about 400 megawatts of solar to the system. So we continue to work to develop those projects and hope to get them online here in the next couple of years. So our deployment and build of solar will continue. We've seen great success with what we have on the system already.
As I mentioned, we have received a number of questions leading up to this morning about solar, and a number of them were prompted by the proposed, and I want to be clear about this, and the Gazette's written a lot about this, the proposed solar farm at the soon-to-be former Duane Arnold site near Palo. And then there was also talk of another one at or near Cauga, still in Lynn County, both by NextEra, putting those together. We don't have anyone here today from NextEra, but so I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to ask a question of Chad and a question of May. So anybody else wants to take this? May, this has to go through a proposal process, right? It's got to go to the Iowa utility boards. You've been through those, and I realize you have not. Alliant is not. This is not an Alliant project, but how does that process work? So you want to build something somewhere. What has to happen, hypothetically?
Hypothetically, so if we think about a large-scale solar build that is similar to the one that NextEra is proposing in Palo, it requires conversations with landowners, getting control of the land where those assets are going to get placed. It requires permitting so the environmental impacts can be taken into account. It requires approval from the Iowa Utilities Board. So there is a lot of structure and governance built into projects of that size. So that's what I would offer there. I'm not as familiar with all of the steps associated with solar generation builds, but that's what I would offer. I would say some good governance, some steps that they need to move through, and a place where the public can continue to voice their opinions, concerns, thoughts, whatever they might be. It's all kind of out there publicly, and people can comment and be a part of that process as they wish.
And the Iowa Utility Board, if I understand this correctly, it regulates investor-owned utilities. That's its function, right? It's a regulatory body, and there are 3 members, I think. Okay. So, Chad, given all this discussion, and Van Meter does a great deal in solar, which is why you're here. The issues are cost, right, and availability. It's not really cheap to put these things up, whether you're a business or your home or your Alliant Energy or your NextEra, whomever. It's not inexpensive, and correct me if I'm wrong, certainly not in the short run. The arrays are stationary. Why would you do this? Why would you want to do this other than save the planet, of course? And somebody asked, are these recyclable?
Yeah, so
your turn.
Go back to bus up a sec. I think cost and expensive are both relative terms. At one time, yes.
It was a trick question, I admit it.
At one time, yes. I think there's 2 or 3 things that are kind of converging all at the same time right now, which is why you've seen such an aggressive adoption rate of solar at every level the last 2 or 3 years. But I would first start by saying it's really the mindset of the average consumer at the residential and commercial level. Look, the price of energy continues to go up, not down. The cost of solar over the last 5 or 6 years has come down pretty aggressively from an equipment and economies of scale standpoint. And at the same time, it's not only the cost of the raw materials, which today is not coming down due to what we're coming out of. But that said, the density and the power output of the panels has increased significantly. I mean, just 4 years ago, we were dealing with maybe a 200 watt panel. Today, we're up to 560, 570. a while.
Chad, you're cutting out there a little bit. Maybe you could let's try that. There you go.
Is that better?
It is. Thank you.
So you've got the cost of solar coming down. You've got the power output of the modules going up. You've got a rising cost climate of traditional energy sources. And I think the mindset of the consumer on average is transitioning from only looking at the acquisition cost to looking at the long-term ownership cost. So if I own a home that I'm planning on staying in for 5 to 10 years, if I own a business that I'm planning on being in for 5 to 10 years, it's more predictable than it's ever been in terms of your return on investment. So I think we've seen this before, right? We saw it in LED lighting. When LED lighting first showed up on the scene, everybody went to Lowe's and Menards, picked it up, looked at the price, put it back, and grabbed an incandescent bulb, right? It wasn't until some subsidies, rebates, particularly from Alliant and Mid-Am and other investor-owned utilities, incentivized people to bulb in their ceiling, and ultimately created a bridge for economies of scale to take place and that cost per unit to come down. Now the average consumer wouldn't think twice about buying LED, or when they build a house putting LED in, all the way up to utilities using LED in all of their lamps. EVs are going to change, continue to change adoption from a consumer level. Again, just 5 or 6 short years ago, it was Tesla. Pretty soon you're going to be able to walk on a lot and buy a Ford F-150 that's all electric. And the cost of that truck relative to the cost of a gasoline truck is going to be nominal. And so when you look at the total cost of ownership, it's going to change, continue to evolve and change. And the consumer mindset is really going that direction as opposed to simply the acquisition costs on the front end. In addition to that, you've got maturing finance options, right? So the bankability of solar in the eyes of many, many lenders, even at the local level, all the way up to the big conglomerates that support utility scale projects, there's real bankability behind solar. Banks are coming out with more traditional loan products that are better understood by the average consumer. So you've got a lot of those facets of what it takes for economic growth, no matter what the widget or technology is, that are now commonplace for solar, where quite frankly, they just weren't there 3 or 4 years ago. So I think you're going to continue to see aggressive growth, adoption at every level. And those are some of the primary reasons as to why people are making the investment.
Michael, can I add a perspective here about utility scale solar? And let me preface my comments with, I mentioned ITC Midwest is transmission only. We're an independent transmission provider. So the type of resource really makes no difference to us. We don't discriminate. But in a prior life, I was involved in resource planning for a Iowa utility, and was involved in solar and wind development. And I know there's a lot of concern coming out of Lynn County about the 2 proposed solar projects. And what I would encourage folks to do is ask questions, get informed. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, obviously, but make sure you know what the real impacts are of a project like that. If you look at the future of the Iowa power grid, it will be stronger with diverse generation resources. And big part of what's driving the push towards wind and solar is cost. Costs have come down considerably, particularly at the utility scale. And if you think back to when the Duane Arnold Energy Center was being built in 1974 in Palo, or just outside of Palo, there was opposition, there was concern at that time. But over time, that community has really embraced that source of generation and seen the benefits from it. And so I would encourage you to do the same when it comes to these solar projects. Understand what the real impact will be to the community, how they will be managed and operated over time. And if you want to see what 100 megawatts of solar looks like, you can take a trip south to Wapello down in Louisa County. And there's a 100 megawatt solar facility that just came online earlier this year that's operating, producing energy for the grid. So just encourage folks to keep an open mind and get informed.
Yeah, I would piggyback off that by saying I've seen all different scales of solar from, you know, 20 kW systems all the way up to 400 and 500 megawatt sites. The reality is, as we look at utility scale investment, utilities are looking at solar just as they would any other traditional generation source. And the levelized cost of solar that gap has closed significantly. And in many cases, it's not only closed, solar has taken a pretty substantial lead when you look at owning a generation source over a long period of time, 30, 40, 50 years. The cost to get that constructed, the power output, and then the decommissioning cost and timeline really puts solar alongside traditional generation sources. It puts it at the forefront right now. It's not always the right answer for all situations, but it's increasingly becoming a really fiscally responsible, more environmentally friendly. There are some environmental things associated with solar that that have environmental impact that need to be considered, but particularly the Duane Arnold site. Look, it's a site that was and is used and was used for generations. So I think one of the things that site has going for it is you're replacing it with additional generation, albeit an alternative generation site, but they're not reclaiming additional land or space or use. They're reusing an existing site to do the same thing that it did for many years. Secondarily, I think in terms of solar versus wind or another traditional generation source, ultimately you spoke to the fact that it's fixed. Almost on 100% of utility scale projects, they are adopting a single or dual access trackers. That is commonplace for anything, I would say 100 megawatts or greater. We're seeing adoption for single access trackers really on larger rural residential and commercial sites. So the ability to leverage trackers that move with the movement of the sun is not only being used, but it's being widely adopted. So I think you're going to see, as the months turn into years and years turn into decades, you're going to continue to see the convergence of many technologies that work into the diversification that Dusky mentioned. It's absolutely critical for grid integrity. The mix of these fuel sources over time is really one of the primary methods to insulate ourselves, from brownouts, from significant power outages, and ultimately for cost diversity as well when it comes to rate makeup and other things that are important to ratepayers.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of brownouts, and one of the questions has come up, and I don't know if anyone here knows the answer to this. We're talking about the Biden administration's infrastructure plan, big plan, and all its variations. Are there any provisions to address grid resilience or renewable or battery deployment or any of that in there? Do we know? Do we know if it talks about grid resilience? I don't either. Okay. I will find out though. So when Chad was talking about solar, I noticed Michaela and Kerri, you were both nodding your heads in agreement about that's what we need to do. Michaela, what are you? How much is Dubuque into solar? How much are we doing this up there?
So Dubuque continues to find some challenges in reaching certain, residents, especially within the urban center, as we continue to pull away from having a state, tax credit for their solar installations. So our current capacity here in Dubuque is just backlogged, as other communities are also experiencing throughout the state, just due to the solar tax credit. However, I drive around the county, we're starting to watch more and more rural installations taking place, so larger scale installs are being taken place. And we also are noticing more businesses taking a sustainable or renewable approach to energy generation. We have a local brewery that has started from the beginning with a sustainable model, and they recently have adapted a solar system and put a solar garden in. They're starting to do that right now. In addition, they're utilizing some of this solar generation to create electric gas. So when they have electric vehicles that pull up to, come in and have a brew and eat some food, they can utilize the energy generation from the solar. So we're watching a couple other businesses learn from this, model that was started here, and businesses starting to adapt as well. On the residential side of things, we continue to hear from our local solar installers that they always are receiving questions about, number one, if they would be able to get a solar installation, completed. And right now is the really busy season. So, usually they'll get put off to next year. So they're overwhelmed at this point. Additionally, we in Dubuque continue to look for ways to leverage private and public dollars to do low-income solar install projects. So we're working on integrating that component into our conversation as well. So overall, our community has embraced the solar conversation much more so than our wind generation partners to the west of here. But they also are, interested in not only saving money, but saving our planet. So we're a little bit more, of an urban center with some rural communities that are really starting to take hold of that.
Okay, thank you. We are in our last hard stop, 4 minutes. So we're going to go round robin here, around the table. Energy is expensive, right? We're telling customers throttle back on their thermostats. What other actions can businesses, customers take? And what are utilities doing? I mean, I know that's a big question, but just what can we do with all these different ideas and to at least help keep costs down as businesses reopen? May, what can we do?
Great question. So usage is a large driver of a customer's bill. I would encourage customers to really understand what their usage looks like, when they're using, how they're using, and think about those energy efficiency programs and find ways to save. We actually deployed recently a new online system. So if you're not enrolled in our My Account system as an IPL customer, I would highly encourage folks to do that. Lots of great information. You can see exactly when you are using your energy and can really start thinking about what are those energy efficiency opportunities that I have either in my home or in my business.
Dusky, last thoughts?
Yeah, we don't serve any retail customers directly, but the one thing we can do is provide the transmission system that allows that low cost generation to be connected to the grid, the wind and the solar, that's driving the overall market price for energy down and resulting in cost savings to the consumer.
Mr. Wiltz, thoughts?
I would just say become increasingly educated on what your options are. I think May hit the nail on the head. Start with what's right in front of you, which is how can I use less energy within the confines of how I use energy and where I use energy. And then from there you can progress. There's countless examples of residential, commercial, or utility solar projects. I'd encourage people to just reach out to the community and figure out where one's at and go look at it. Go ask the owner how their experience has been. But I think do what you can do to reduce your consumption first.
Kerri, what's the Iowa Environmental Council tell us?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that individuals can do, but the energy system as a whole is really what's important to look at. And so I would encourage people, as renewable sources become less expensive, emphasizing again that the cheapest kilowatt hour that we have is the one that we never use, right? And so I think looking at the policies that are driving where we're making investments, the kinds of programs that are available, I would encourage people to get active in ensuring that those are available for them and for all people in the state of Iowa to save money on their energy bills.
Michaela, last thoughts?
So as other businesses continue to share, their impact, LED bulbs are really important to transition into. Number one, as Kerri mentioned, you're not using as many kilowatts to power those LED bulbs, and you're using less energy on the forefront. And you can save a lot of money just by doing something that simple. Policies are, as mentioned prior as well, really, really important to be locally, at the state level or federally. And here in our state, we had some funding that was cut for weatherization and energy efficiency programming, fighting to bring that funding back. Number one, it helped our businesses and their transition, as well as our residents. So in Dubuque, we're seeing 60% of our low-income residents and at-risk residents who are no longer being served right now because of this piece of legislation in 2018. So working with our local teams here, whether it be our Green Iowa AmeriCorps teams, our community action program teams, we're getting into these homes that are previously in a gap period for service of weatherization, and providing them with energy efficiency, conversation, as well as getting them the tools they need to seal the gaps around their windows, or making sure there's no airflow coming in through a light switch. So our communities right now need to continue to advocate to have a couple lines in our state code removed, so we can put more energy efficient measures into our own communities as well, when homes are being assessed and homes are being audited. So we can make that impact just as equally as a personal level.
Okay, thank you. But we knew we were going to have a lot to apologize for the folks who sent in questions we did not get to, but we had a lot. I want to thank our panelists, May, Dusky, Kerri, Michaela, Chad. Thank you for your time. I know you all have things to do today, and I appreciate your being here. I want to thank those of you watching live, and if you want to watch this again, it will be uploaded to our website later today. Thank you to Chelsea Greider, our events manager, who's been vetting the questions and sending them along. Thanks to our sponsor, Bergen KDB and Nicole, to our community partners, Nuboco and Corda Cruz. A couple of important things I got to say. Our annual Gazette's Business Awards, sponsored by True North. Nominations are open right now. You can go to thegazette.com/business awards. Just as we did in 2020, that oh so lovely year, Gazette reporters and I will be interviewing the award recipients about the secrets to their success. So please nominate yourself, nominate a vendor, nominate a business you work with. Our next business breakfast panel will be November 9. Join us, won't you? And remember, this very discussion is being recorded and will be available to watch on the Gazette site. And that'll be later today. Again, thank you all. Thank you to our panelists. And I think we're done. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Michael.